Deep in the icy wastelands of Antarctica, where no nation truly rules, stands a lonely, frozen face staring into the endless white. This is Lenin, and this is one of the strangest places his statues have ever ended up. But how did Lenin, the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution, become one of the most sculpted men in history? And what happened to these monuments after the fall of the USSR? Let's explore the fascinating journey of Lenin's statues, from symbols of power to relics of a vanished empire. In 1958, Soviet scientists on an Antarctic expedition erected a bust of Lenin at a remote research station called the Pole of Inaccessibility, one of the most difficult places on Earth to reach. Unlike the South Pole, which sees regular expeditions, this spot is the furthest point from any ocean, deep in the heart of the Antarctic ice sheet. Reaching this frozen wasteland was an incredible challenge. Soviet explorers had to travel over 2,000 kilometers across brutal, uncharted terrain in sub-zero temperatures, battling fierce winds and the constant threat of ice crevasses. The station they built was temporary, buried under snow, but they left behind something permanent. Lenin. Why? Because this was more than just a scientific mission. It was a political statement. The Soviet Union wanted to prove its dominance, not just on land, in space, or at the poles, but even in the most unreachable place on Earth. Planting Lenin's bust there symbolized that communism had no limits, no boundaries, and no place was too remote for Soviet ideology to take root. Today, the station is long gone, buried beneath the ice, but Lenin remains. His frozen bust still stands, emerging from the snow, staring out over the white emptiness. A forgotten relic of Soviet ambition, a monument to a time when the USSR tried to claim even the most desolate corners of the world. At the height of Soviet influence, Lenin was everywhere. Schools, factories, city squares. Wherever you looked, a Lenin statue was watching. More than 14,000 statues were built in the USSR alone, with thousands more in allied nations. His likeness wasn't just a tribute, it was a tool of power, a reminder that the revolution never ended. In the 1930s, the Soviet Union planned to build one of the most colossal statues in history. A monument to Lenin so massive it would have overshadowed everything before it. This grand project, called the Palace of the Soviets, was intended to be the tallest building in the world, crowned by an enormous 100-meter, 328-foot statue of Lenin. Why such an ambitious project? Because Lenin was not just a leader, he was a symbol. To the Soviet state, he represented revolution, ideology, and an unbreakable legacy. Statues of him weren't just tributes. They were political tools, constantly reminding citizens of the power of communism. The Palace of the Soviets was meant to be the ultimate expression of that power. Designed to stand on the former site of the demolished Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow, it would have been a skyscraper unlike any other, topped with Lenin standing high above the Soviet capital, hand raised in eternal leadership. But the dream never became reality. World War II put the project on hold, and after the war, the idea was quietly abandoned. The materials intended for the palace were instead used to rebuild Moscow's subway system, and the foundation remained an empty crater for years. Eventually, in the 1990s, the original cathedral was rebuilt in its place, a symbolic reversal of history. This wasn't the only grand Lenin monument ever envisioned. The Soviets frequently attempted massive ideological statues, like the Mammoth Lenin in Mongolia, which would have depicted him seated on an enormous throne, or the ambitious Lenin's face in the Ural Mountains, a Mount Rushmore-style project that was never completed. These colossal Lenin statues were meant to be more than art. They were designed to be eternal, unshakable landmarks of Soviet ideology. But as history has shown, even the biggest monuments can crumble. And Lenin's statues, no matter how massive, could not stand against the passing of time. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, things began to change. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, Lenin statues went from sacred to controversial. Across Eastern Europe and former Soviet republics, Lenin was dragged down, smashed, or even auctioned off. In some places, his removal was a statement of independence. In others, it was an act of revenge. In Ukraine, Lenin statues were systematically removed as the country distanced itself from its Soviet past. But in some places, people got creative. After one Lenin statue in Kyiv was decapitated, artists transformed the empty pedestal into a platform for different art pieces. One day, it was Lenin. Next day, Darth Vader. Yes, you heard that right. In Odisha, a Lenin statue was turned into Darth Vader. Instead of destroying it, a local artist decided to modify it, covering Lenin's head with Vader's signature helmet. It was a statement on authoritarianism. Whether under the Soviet Union or the Galactic Empire, the message was clear. Power, no matter who holds it, has a dark side. In Romania, where Soviet influence was once strong, a modern artist flipped history, literally. This Lenin sculpture, hanging upside down, symbolizes the collapse of communist ideals and the reversal of power. But not all Lenin statues were destroyed. Some, like this massive head in Ulan-Ude, Russia, remain standing. At over 7 meters tall, it's the largest Lenin head in the world. To locals, it's just part of the landscape now, sometimes dressed up for festivals, sometimes ignored, but never forgotten. Perhaps one of the eeriest Lenin statues lies beneath the waves of the Black Sea. Sunk during the chaotic years following the Soviet collapse, this Lenin now watches silently from the ocean floor, a symbol of a revolution that drowned with time. But perhaps the most unexpected Lenin stands in Seattle, USA. This Soviet-era statue, originally from Slovakia, was brought to America by an eccentric entrepreneur. Now, in the heart of a capitalist country, Lenin stands surrounded by coffee shops and tech startups, a strange irony that even history couldn't predict. While most countries moved away from Lenin, Belarus took a different path. Here, a gold-plated Lenin stands proudly, maintained by a government that still embraces parts of the Soviet legacy. To some, it's a tribute. To others, a refusal to move forward. The fate of Lenin's statues tells a bigger story. Where they still stand, they serve as reminders of revolution, of power, of history's weight. Where they've been destroyed or altered, they speak to the rejection of the past, the rewriting of identity, and the struggle to define the future. Some see their removal as erasing history. Others see it as reclaiming it. From ice-cold Antarctica to the depths of the Black Sea, from communist capitals to capitalist cities, Lenin's statues have endured. Some remain symbols of history. Some are reminders of oppression, and others have been repurposed into art or protest. But one thing is clear. Even though the Soviet Union is gone, its most sculpted man refuses to disappear. So, what do you think? Should Lenin's statues be preserved as historical artifacts, or should they all be taken down? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history's strangest statues, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.